All right, everybody. I was having too much fun chatting backstage with our panelists for this next session. And you guys are going to really, really enjoy this because we're talking about something really important, which is measuring what matters to everybody when it comes to signage. Because ROI is so important. It is such an important thing to talk about. And so I'm very excited to bring on this next panel to help us talk about that. So, first, we have Brandon Harp, we have Mark Coxon, and we have Misty Chalk. Welcome, you guys. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, thanks for having us. Yeah.
So, I want to just first go around and have you guys each just introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your experience. Brandon, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Brandon Harp, Director of Digital Experiences for McCann Systems. We design, build, service experiential AV projects. We create, solutions utilizing lots of different technologies. We bring them all together to create kind of immersive and engaging environments where people can have a unique and engaging experience. So I lead a team here called McCann X, which is a sub brand of McCann, and we focus on these very custom, bespoke spaces that we've all, come to know and love.
Perfect. Mark, what about you?
Mark Coxon. I'm the Director of Strategy and Markets with XTG within AV ISPL. In a similar vein, we're the experiential technology group that works on things like executive briefing centers, museums. Experiential workplace is the new piece that we're working a lot with when we're talking to clients, but really focusing on human-centered design and the outcomes that businesses are looking to accomplish, and then being able to figure out then what technology stack enables those outcomes, and really working that problem. I'm not going to say backwards. I'm saying we're working it the correct way forwards, from the outcomes to the technology, as opposed to throwing technology at a problem and then figuring out how people get outcomes out of it. So,
Absolutely. Last but not least, Misty.
So Misty Chalk, I'm with Bright Signs. I'm the Vice President of Sales for the Americas at Bright Signs. So Bright Sign is the global leader in digital signage hardware, and we manufacture hardware and software solutions that are purpose-built specifically for digital signage.
Amazing. So, let's just jump right in. I'm going to kind of throw most of these questions just out to the general group, and whoever wants to answer it first, feel free. So, when we talk about signage that just works, what does success actually look like today to each of you, and how has that definition evolved since you've been in the industry? That's like a really big question to start off with. So, like, sorry.
it
I'm
is.
looking at Mark here. Go ahead, Mark.
I will say, so for me, I think, signage has expanded, and I think, Fabian was talking about that right in the keynote, that the signage has expanded in its scope of what people think of digital signage as. As more screens have hit the network, every screen on a network becomes a node and then has the potential to be a sign of some kind, right? Whether that's an emergency alert, whether that's an employee message, whether that's a room warmer in a Teams room, or whether that's a screen in a transportation facility or a wayfinding screen or any of those things. And sometimes they serve multiple purposes, right? So when we think about signage networks that just work, I think a big portion of that is number one, obviously the technical part. Screens have to be on, the players have to be running, the content needs to be visible. We can't have any blue screens of death, which Microsoft I think changed to black, but we can't have black screens of death or whatever. But we can't have that anymore. But I think that's the low bar to entry, right? For my customers, most of the time, screens that work are screens that are able to be scheduled, that are able to be very flexible in what they're showing throughout the day, to have schedule-based content based on what's going on, to be relevant, and to be completely portable so that they can, transport their content that they've made in different ways, that lives in different systems within their business, and be able to then, push that out to these signage systems. So things like APIs and SDKs and content management systems and all of these things that allow us to connect those together. So, like in corporate, for instance, the relationship between AppSpace and Microsoft Teams is is really, really important, because now AppSpace is part of Teams, and then you can have digital signage content come up on a Teams room screen when you're not in the room. So for me, those are the parts of the puzzle that needs to just work. I think those now are becoming the minimum kind of component that customers are looking for when they're looking for signage systems. And as integrators and as manufacturers, we have to make sure that we're number one, able to understand how those things work so we can integrate them together, but also how to build them, on Misty's side, so that you have the ability to import, all of those different kind of programs, apps, et cetera, into your system to make sure it can play back, reliably.
Yeah. So I would agree. I think that the reliability is a table stake, right? So it's like we talk about the blue screens and the black screens of death all the time. And it's like if your screen goes black, you have no content. So it's completely moot at that point, right? So that's just a table stake. You've got to make sure when you make those decisions in the beginning, when you implement that's part of that discussion. But I think if you can get beyond that, like when your content's running and your uptimes are towards 100%, what does that actually look like as far as content's concerned? And I think that one thing that we should be focusing on with Measure Success is meeting the customer where we're at, because it is about our branding and about the information that we need to get out there. But it's also about doing that in a way that is engaging and it creates an experience for whoever is engaging with that sign, right? Because that is kind of where we're at with technology these days, is everything is so hyper personalized and everyone expects an experience, right? We can't go into even a grocery store without having some kind of an experience and a personalization aspect to it. So I think getting past like the reliability part, which is huge, I think looking at the content and really meeting customers where they're at, and learning how to get these customers to engage with your content, that's what really does determine success.
Absolutely.
And I might just add to that too. We started talking about this last week at DSE out in San Diego, and I think it's an interesting topic. Is planning, right? Proper planning before you can even deploy a signage network, right? And I think there was a day and age where everything was a screen and everyone wanted it to be touch, and those days have kind of come and gone, right? And the old adage of bigger isn't always better. I think more thought and preparation that goes into, being able to say, okay, we've put the screens and so forth in the right place to be able to influence everything that Misty and Mark just talked about. But then that also gives us the ability to be able to then measure, the efficacy or the impact that those have on individuals, right? And there's so many ways nowadays that screens can be used. It could be artistic, it could be advertising, it could be informational. And I think it's just a matter of working with experienced designers and spatial planners and so forth to really do the kind of front end, call it research and evaluation and due diligence that's going to then lead to that successful outcome, I think, that you're looking for in the end.
So you brought up an interesting point, or a few interesting points, Brandon, but one of those was the planning portion. So do you all, in your opinions, think that clients are getting better at identifying like what they want to measure from the start? Or are you seeing that conversation still often happens a bit too late in the process?
Well, I think that they have the idea that they want to measure something, because to me, the data doesn't lie, right? And if you're taking that data and you're utilizing it in a way that's going to then influence buying behaviors and, selling more concessions, or, improving just passenger, feeling and so forth. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think a lot of the clients have kind of an idea of that. They just don't understand what it takes to be able to execute something like that, right? And so that's where you get, people like us involved, and Mark and Misty to help you think that through, right? What is it that you're trying to do with the screens, and then how can we then help you gather and collect data that is relevant to your business and to your business use case. I think that's kind of where it starts, at least for me.
I would disagree a little bit, just because I do think that I'm always the controversial one. That's why they
No, I
invite
love
me.
it.
Good,
I
though.
love
That's
it.
why
I do think that we don't have the right conversations up front. I think that when people are applying digital signage, they don't really understand what it's capable of. And so when you talk about like measurements and things like that, that becomes almost like a side product. Like, yeah, it's going to be a benefit of when I actually deploy this, but they have no idea what it is that they're actually going to measure. And I think one of the things that if you dial it all back and reverse engineer it, like having the conversations about not just what you want to do with your content and all that kind of stuff, but like what problem are you actually solving for? Because if you don't understand that, then how do you measure anything, right? And it's going to depend on vertical as well. So if you look at transportation, for instance, like if you talk about to transportation customers about what they're trying to accomplish, it's about getting information out there, right? Like they're wanting to get their FIDs and GIDs, and they've got the flight information systems and all those things. It's about information. But what you're actually solving for and where the connection comes into your audience is bigger than that. Like if it's only about getting information out there, then you're missing a component of that where the measurement comes in is it's not just I got the information there, but if I walk past it and I'm not looking at it, then what problem did I actually solve? Right. So it's about the engagement level and about how I feel about that content. It's not just dwell times. It's like whether or not I'm actually looking at that content and whether how it made me feel. Because what you're actually solving for with getting information out there to your customers, it's supposed to make them feel better, right? Like people want information. They want to know what's happening. So I think we don't have the right conversations up front enough to talk about what are we actually solving for with your signage platform, because it's such a personal experience for every single brand, and it changes by vertical. So I don't think we are actually having the right conversations up front so that people understand how they measure things. It becomes a byproduct of what they bought.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you in this. And here's the thing, digital signage was initially born out of advertising. And so the metrics for advertising are things like, traffic, how many potential impressions could you get as somebody comes through? How many times did your content play in a 2-hour period when at that intersection when 1,000 people were walking by? Those were kind of things that people were selling as advertising. Then digital signage became a very point of sale. Did somebody touch the button? Did somebody scan the QR code? Did somebody buy the product? Right. And those are very quantitative levels of measuring impact of digital signage and ROI and what it is. Now, when you're talking about something like what Misty's talking about, like in an airport, impressions isn't a big thing. Like, right, there's going to be 10,000 people that walk by that screen. Like she said, if you don't look up at it and you don't get the information, does the impression matter? Probably not. If you stand there and you stare at it and you view it and you have like dwell time, but you're not actually absorbing or getting the information, you're actually standing there longer because you can't find what you're looking for, then dwell time is not a great thing. You might want less dwell time in something like that. You almost have to think of like a customer service, like it's better when you resolve the call quicker than if they're on the phone for 5 minutes, right? And then the third thing is the qualitative part of that. Did the people make their flight on time? Was it easy to get to the tram? Like those are things that you now actually have to go out and ask people how they felt about their experience. And you have to gather data beyond the data that's just happening on a sensor or on a scan or on a QR code. And that's the same in experiential workplace. Like you can put up, information about the company, about the mission. Like we see companies that are like, okay, you're in IT and you're answering IT tickets all day long, but how do you feel connected to the greater mission of the organization? If you're answering IT tickets for a healthcare company that builds surgical robots that are saving people's lives in cancer centers, and you're putting up signage that reminds them that the work that you're doing is actually enabling people to save lives across the globe, all of a sudden now that piece of digital signage helps with employee retention. It helps with morale. It helps with employee engagement. And those are things that aren't typically measured by a sensor or a camera or a pressure sensor or anything that's standing there at the sign that we would normally think from an advertising perspective were metrics that we used to sell. And we have to really think about how are we now capturing these qualitative metrics that measure the emotional impact and the actual real world impact of the sign on the piece. And you have to define those outcomes. Why am I putting experiential signage in the business? Oh, great. I want to attract better talent when people come and do tours. I want my employees to feel better about what they do every day. I want them to be more engaged and refreshed. When they go to lunch and they're frustrated from the customer that just yelled at them, they get this message of the mission of the company that reinvigorates them so that when they go back, now they're ready to do another 2 hours of that hard work that they have to sit there and do. And those are things that are harder to measure unless we implement new ways to collect data from the people that are actually interfacing with the signs that they pass by.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of leads me to this next question. You kind of talked about this, but when we talk about like data, there's so much data that you can be collecting. There's so much available out there, but not all of it is useful to each install, right? So, is there a metric or a type of metric that you each find most valuable when evaluating signage performance, or does it really depend install upon install?
I think it depends because, like I said earlier, like signage is personal, right? That's what my goal is, and the impact that I need to make, and the engagement that I need, and at what level is going to be different than what Mark or Brandon are going to experience. Like it is a personal journey for your brand and for your company. So I think that it does change because, for instance, what's very impactful in retail is not the same in corporate, right? Like so. I think it absolutely that's part of what makes signage so I think difficult for people to navigate
Yeah.
is because the creative and part of it is always the hardest part of it, right? You can't just copy what the guy did next door because it may not pertain to you or your business. So it's like we talked about the transportation aspect of it, like Mark's absolutely right. Like I don't necessarily want dwell time when I'm at the FID screen, right? Like that's bad for me. Like that means that, and if I'm using AI or gaze detection or whatever else, and this person is visibly frustrated, I didn't actually get across what I needed to do. And so, but for others, when I'm in a retail environment, I want them to dwell. I want them to pick something up. I want them to interact. Like I don't want them to just move on. So it is very, very different based on whatever use case you have and what your business is.
And I'll jump back to the corporate example that Mark gave before. I was at Work Tech 25 just a couple of weeks ago, and something that really resonated with me was the gentleman from Sanofi was talking about how they use audience measurement to actually then design and construct their work plates, right? So they might have a new office that's being built, and they're going to look at these basically these heat maps that show where people are spending most of their time, right? And so they're then making the floor plates adjustable so that they can then rearrange the technology, but also the furniture and so forth, so that it actually accommodates people to be more collaborative and really helps them use all the different tools that they're given at to the maximum capacity. And I think doing that and being very granular with that, you can even take that down to the signage level, right? Because if you're looking at places where people are congregating, well, it might be a medium-sized conference room, and do you have enough seats in there? Do you have the temperature properly controlled? Is there does the display that's in the room actually have enough size so that people can see it and so forth, and does it fit with the room and this and that? So I think you can learn a lot from like just measuring the audience that goes into various different workplaces in these different rooms, and then be flexible and adjustable enough, work with your partners, your integrators and so forth, to then say, okay, let's make sure that we have infrastructure in other places where so that we can be adjustable like that and make those kind of accommodations for our employees and such.
Yeah, I'm on the it depends train here too. I think the outcome of the system determines the metrics that matter.
Yep.
Right. So if you don't have a clearly defined reason that you're putting a digital signage network in or a screen on a wall at the location that it's at, then you've started at the wrong point. Because with that screen there, everybody's got this in their pocket. Everybody's got a 3.5-inch, 4-inch screen in their pocket that'll serve them whatever content they want at any point in time that they want to consume it. So there's no such thing as a captive audience anymore, hardly. Maybe if you're on an escalator going down at an airport and you're pulling your suitcase, you might look at the LED above the escalator for a few minutes instead of looking down at your phone because you're trying to manage your balance and not get stuck on the stairs, et cetera. But in most cases, there's really not the idea of a captive audience is gone. And so, determining what the outcome of the screen is, what is the purpose of this? How would we measure it? What would success look like? What would that look like in retention? What would that look like in dollars? What would that look like in customer conversion? What would that look like in brand recognition? Whatever that happens to be. And then going backwards towards, okay, now how do we actually create content that will get someone's attention so that they pay attention for the amount of time that they should, get them the information that we want to get them in order to accomplish the outcome and then move forward, right? So I think that part's really important. I'm just going to jump in on this one just because I kind of saw it when they're talking about surveys and stuff. About gathering data, obviously there's a lot of privacy concerns and security, and I know that was part of what we were talking about earlier too, with the idea of AI and personalization, which Misty talked about. Everybody wants a personalized experience. There are some ways to do some non-intrusive collection of data anonymously. There are ways to use sensors like cameras without actually recording anything and without actually cataloging faces and doing all of those things. Like even in conference rooms, Neat Pulse will count how many people are in there, but it's not actually taking a recording of the room, right? So there are ways to use sensors and understand where people are looking and how many people are there without invading on privacy in a way that's very anonymous. Brandon and I also went to a show one time where they collected data. You were able to anonymously contribute your data from your device. So your Apple Watch is a biometric device, and you could actually contribute data from your watch during the conference, and it would tell the people who were running the conference when the audience was getting restless, when they were actually starting to get bored, when their heart rates change, when the temperature in the room would make people shuffle around more, and actually be able to then determine when breaks should be or how long content should be or all of those things, right? So we can collect data in a lot of different ways. Sure, it requires people to, if they don't want to answer surveys, it does require some extra sensors or maybe some extra opt-in. But as long as it's done responsibly and anonymously and not cataloged or stored or things like that, then I think it can be very, very valuable without causing those ethical concerns.
Yeah, because then we have another audience question that just came in right after the one that you addressed, Mark, that someone asked, couldn't you just use an AI camera to monitor the number of people who look at the display and for how long, and then report that data?
So
100%.
you do that. We do that now, right? There's the modeling that's out there already. It's called gaze detection, and so you can use gaze detection to not only determine like what my dwell time is, but how I feel. And again, to Mark's point, anonymously, it doesn't know I'm Misty Chalk, but it will anonymously know that how I feel reading this content and what my engagement level is. And so if I'm looking at it and I feel sad, then that is a metric, right? So it's like you didn't get the emotion from me that you were hoping for, and especially in a retail environment, being able to adjust to that and change your content on the fly based on emotions. So that is already out there being done, and that's where you're going to see, I think, digital signage kind of moving is with this AI. I think we embraced AI a long time ago, just because I think that it lends very well to our industry. But I think that that's where you're going to see it go, is AI on the edge, right? And then all the analytics being ran at the hardware itself, and then where you're actually getting this real-time data so that you can determine if your content's performing and what level is it performing, and you can change it on the fly. So those things are, yes, I don't think that surveys are required anymore. I mean, and you can use AI to stitch the journey together, right? Based on the different sensors that you have, and taking that data, stitching it together and giving you this real life outcome at your fingertips that says that this is what they felt like through the journey through your store, for instance, in a retail environment. That's real right now. That's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. And I think, with the personalization, you can get the real heartbeat of what's happening, right? So if people smiled when children were on the screen, and then it goes to a down note, and it seems like everybody who's gazing at the screen is starting to have an emotional, trough for the most part. You can go right back into positive content, like on the fly. It's just in the CMS, and it says, hey, when this thing happens, it's just a big if then loop, but it's using those sensors. I think that's a great application there, Misty. And I know, it's what they're doing online, obviously. Like, with AI, you can do hyper personalization of ads. Like if you're watching a Mini Cooper ad on Facebook, because it knows all the profile stuff about you. Like if you live in Chicago, the Mini Cooper will drive through Chicago. It'll be the 4-door version because it knows you have 2 kids, and it'll stop at a grocery store. And if you're that same person getting that same ad, the agent that's running that ad will say, oh, this person's in rural Minnesota, they're a single person, and they usually end up at the office every day. And that ad plays that same thing, and it just reskins it in Unreal, puts it in a different environment, puts it back through, and it can serve that ad 10,000 different ways simultaneously to 10,000 different people on that social media platform with just AI personalization and the way that they set up the nodes. So we're definitely in a place where we can adjust content if we're collecting the right data.
Yeah, and just a note on that, because that wouldn't require an AI camera, for instance. It's just a normal camera that plugs in. It requires AI on the hardware, right? You can do that. So you can do
Yep.
it on the edge, you can do it in the cloud, but it wouldn't require like a specific AI camera. That's why it's already readily available, and it can be mainstream.
100%.
Where do you all find the balance between those quantitative metrics like dwell time and engagement, like you were mentioning, with the qualitative goals of that emotional impact that you were talking about earlier, like knowing when to make something sad or then dial it back depending on what someone's emotional response is?
I'm I s- I'm probably on the edge of this, and I will say I think the quantitative metrics matter less and less and less every single day.
I think it's
Because
about a balance. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can't have zero eyes on it, right? You have to. I
Right.
mean, you have to be able to know that an audience that you want to reach is going to see it. But I don't think that sheer number of people passing a screen just on its own is worth much, right? Like you actually have to create a physical change in the person. What do you want them to think, feel, and do? And if they don't think, feel, or do anything, then it was a failure, whether 1,000 people saw it or whether 2 people saw it. So there has to be enough to make the impact that you want to make, but the number on its own, I think, means absolutely nothing without some kind of qualitative data behind it.
Well, and you have to have a plan for what you're going to do with the data too, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're using this so that you can get the data at your fingertips, then if you don't change your content or you don't do that on the fly, right, like then you've completely missed the point of collecting the data in the first place. And so I think that's where sometimes we fall a little bit short is what is our plan if the data that we're getting back is not what we wanted to see, right? And
Yeah.
to Mark's point, like if you have 1,000 people walking past your screen and nobody actually engages with it, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? I do think, yeah, you have to have a plan on what you're actually going to do with the data.
Mhm.
I think that goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, right? Is properly planning for the signage rollout, right? And then going with the signage rollout goes content that is actually engaging and, brings you into it, right? Because it's easy to just walk past a screen and not even look at it. But if it's doing something that's triggering a reaction from you, which is ultimately what you want, I think that becomes very effective. I know that, a lot of the projects and things that we're working on and we're constantly being asked about is how do we monetize it, right? And I think the that's always been for me the challenge with digital signage is like how do you prove like a true ROI from something like this? And I think it goes back to being able to capture accurate data and then being able to deliver something in a message in a way that it leads to an outcome that can then be monetized, right? And it might be as something as simple as an ad that reaches you, that delivers you to the food court so that you can stop and buy a Coca-Cola before you get on your flight, or something like that. So I think it's definitely, the conversation around monetization of accurately collected data is a very important one.
Yeah, I think knowing the nuance of the data, like you said, Misty, like what are you collecting? What are you comparing it to? A great book I just read was called Reset by Dan Heath, and he was talking about how you measure certain things. And they were talking about a stadium that used like the happy sad face signs for the bathrooms. So they started using the happy sad face signs for the bathrooms just to kind of let the staff know where they might need to go and focus more effort, as opposed to just doing a rotation that took a lot more manpower. And you might visit bathrooms that don't really need to be serviced yet. But what the interesting thing they found out was that there were much more sad faces on days that their team was losing than there were on days that they were winning. So and the stadium wasn't running any different. It was the mindset of the people that were already in a bad mood or that were already in an emotional state that were more apt to stop and click something to give negative feedback. Just like we see in online, you see many more negative reviews when people feel like they get shafted than you see positive
Yeah.
reviews when they got what they paid for,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But being able to look at that data and go, is there something else going on? So when you do see those variations in the data sets, that you're not treating those as independent variable, like you're not treating those as independent variables. This may be something where a lever got slid somewhere else, and it actually happened to affect this piece. And it's not anything going on with the content or the sign. It's something going on in the macro environment that's giving you that data. So like you also have to be very smart about how you interpret the data in order to make sure that you're not making knee-jerk reactions, thinking that this one lever only does this one thing. This one lever may actually affect 4 different parameters, and if you pull it the wrong way, you may find other things slide around. And so there is a feedback loop. There is a method to go through and test and make sure that you're isolating these things and that they're working. And it's not it's not always an out of the box, it works the first time solution. You do have to evaluate, and then adjust is really the point if you want to get the best out of it.
So we've had some audience questions come in, so I figured I would shift to those because they're pretty good. So Paul asked, "Are we really sure people actually want personalized experiences from signage, or do we just want to show the tech? Shouldn't everyone know what's actually being offered, not just what an AI decided what they should see? Too much automation is just plain creepy."
So I think we all feel that way, but I think that AI is here and there's probably not much we can do about it. But I do think that we don't spend enough time on the integrity of that. So it is about making sure that the companies that you do business with, like, ask them the questions about what their AI policy is and understanding what they're doing with that data. Because there's the famous Warren Buffett quote, right? Like, what are the 3 skill sets that you hire when you're looking for somebody? And it is integrity, intelligence, and energy. And without the first one, the other 2 will kill you. And the same thing with AI. Like, if there's no integrity in the platform that you choose, the intelligence will kill you. So I actually agree with the question in principle, but I do think that there's best practices and there's policies in place, and we all have to have integrity when we're using AI. Like, that is going to have to be a table stake. But I do think the personalization part of it, if you look at what's trending and going in 26 and 27, like personalization, it's everywhere we go. Like, I can't do anything that doesn't show up in my feed somewhere, right? Like, it almost becomes an expectation. So I think that people it will be almost something they won't even notice anymore. So what's next?
Yeah. I think there's I like the question from Paul, and the reason I like it is because there are 2 things that I've noticed with AI. One time sometimes it does limit options that maybe you would like to explore. So just like in my social feeds, I like to do timeline based sometimes instead of relevance, because I don't want the algorithm to pick what it was. I just want to see what the latest things that people are talking about are in my feed. So I think there's the opportunity to have a personalized versus an unpersonalized experience. Like if you walk up to a sign and it's asking you something, it says, "Hey, we're personalizing this experience. Would you like to go broad, or would you like to continue in the personalized experience?" And having the option. So agency, I think, is one of those things that we can offer to make that, number one, less creepy, and also to make that just more valuable to people who don't want the narrower band experience when it's there. The other thing that I notice is, AI will often go towards your biases and won't help you explore, right? And most people in a lot of times in their life, they're in exploratory mode, discovery mode, aspirational mode, where they don't know exactly what they want yet, right? So AI may just go based on those preferences and just continue to lead you down this very narrow path, which can be a little creepy and scary in a way. But I think having, like in chat, like anytime I use chat, I have something called the ramen clause. And so when chat starts to agree with me too much, I say, "You're a consultant paid to kill my idea, or I don't pay you. What is wrong with my idea?" And we call it the ramen clause, because if he doesn't convince me otherwise, he has to eat ramen, right? Like through, because he's going to be broke.
Right.
But and all of a sudden, all of the things it wasn't telling me, it says, "These 6 parts are weak. You should look at this better. This actually could alienate half of your audience." Boom. Right. So yeah, we need to build in these stopgaps that allow us to get out of the self-confirmation familiarity bias that sometimes AI gets us into, and think about that. And it's either something we can build into the platforms at their core as we further develop LLMs and the way that agents work and things like that within AI, or just giving people the agency to push a button to say, "Just give me raw data and I'll filter it the way I want to."
So, and I have another question from Greg too, and I really like this one. If quantified views aren't always relevant, how do signage owners charge advertisers?
I'm the worst person for this one because I don't really play in the advertising screen area. But I'm sure somebody else has a better answer.
So a lot of the times when they're charging advertisers, it's proof of play, right? So they usually will charge them just by how many times that the image actually plays on the screen. But what brands really want is the engagement level of that content. So that's what, when you look at like full retail media networks and whatnot, that's some of the things that they're solving for. Is they don't want to know just how many times did it play, but did anybody actually interact with it? So whether or not it doesn't change necessarily what they're charging for it, but it will help determine, like, is it the placement of it? Like if you start looking at the journey of somebody going into a retail store, and you can offer up these premium spots based on how they turn, they go left, they go right, like whatever they do, then they can charge more for those things. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can get creative on how you actually monetize this. I think one of the other things that will start, like, especially going into 26 and 27, like, it's not just about the proof of play or the advertising side of it, right? It actually is going to be more about putting a monetary value on the entire experience.
Okay.
And I think that's what you're going to see, where AI is going to play a little bit more of a role in that. Because before, when you go into like a retail environment, for instance, there's lots of different ways that they're capturing images, and they're doing it right now. I think the security cameras, right? They're looking at your dwell time when you stop and look at a screen, or I look at a whatever I'm looking at product wise. If I pick it up, how long did I hold it for? Like, when did I set it back down? Like that kind of thing. And so what AI does is it will take all of these different sensors, all these different things happening around the store, and will actually put it all together in real time. And it will give you what my journey looked like going through the store, and possibly how I felt about those things, what my dwell time looked like. And it will start to understand like where those prime spots are that you can charge for. So there's a lot of different ways that they're using this to be able to monetize that. And it's only going to get even more creative, like I said, with more and more AI options available going into 26.
All right. Well, I think that is about all the time we have. So I did just want to go around one more time and have you guys just talk a little bit about where people can find more information on you and your companies, and where they can connect with you online. Brandon, do you want to start us off again?
Yeah, sure. Easily accessible on LinkedIn. It seems like the best platform for all the great professionals and stuff that we work with. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer anything I can for you. And hopefully found some of the insights to be useful today. So thank you.
Perfect. Mark?
Mark Coxon on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active out there on LinkedIn. You can always find me on rAVe Pubs. I'm a contributor on rAVe. So if you read rAVe, I'm there. And then avispl.com/XTG. That's the Experience Technology Group within AVISPL. You can see some of the work that we do across the different verticals that we work in.
Perfect. Misty?
So I'm the same. I'm on LinkedIn. I wish I had something else to say. I'm on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, which is brightsign.biz. And then you can always just email me directly as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This was such a good time, and people were in the comments talking about how good this was. So clearly, y'all are amazing and have great thoughts. So I appreciate you for being a part of Launch Week 12.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks for having
much.
us. Appreciate it.